Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you're all doing well. As you can tell, I am not in the Forerunner tonight. I'm actually going to Iceland tomorrow, so I'm doing a bunch of prep work, getting my equipment ready, and all of those things. So if you're into Iceland, or if you're into landscape photography, or you just like beautiful scenery, make sure you subscribe down below. Speaking of beautiful scenery, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different for this episode. I'm going to be showing you how I took this image in the field from start to finish, but this could be content you may have already seen in a previous episode. So if you have, there will be timestamps down below where you can navigate to whatever you want to watch. But anyways, that said, we're going to be doing a Lightroom edit right after I show you how I took the photo. Let's get started.
Good morning, everyone. This is a special morning because it definitely feels like a little bit slower. Got the backpack out, got the tripods out. There's less of this huge light and feeling really good. I know I'm kind of quiet, kind of mellow, still kind of waking up, but also this mood just makes you feel like a little bit more at peace. Anyways, I think you could already tell what the composition of my shot is. It's pretty much just this, I don't know what kind of tree it is, but it's got red on it, and there's a little bit of yellow in the background. Shooting f8 standard, 70 millimeters. Had to back off the fence just a little bit to try to get everything in the frame that I wanted. And channeling all of my inner British YouTubers, because this is what they shoot all the time, and I don't think this happens really at all in Colorado very often. What's really interesting is I'm up near the mountains on this range, the San Juan range, and this is going to be all in fog, but I guarantee when I drive back down the road, it'll just clear up. It seems to just sit here. Absolutely gorgeous. I'm going to talk about my shot a little bit, and yeah, we'll just go over that. All right, so like I said, composition is very simple. One thing that I had to be mindful of was that when I was at the fence, this little aspen tree here was a little bit too close in the frame, so I just backed off just a little bit. I'm a little bit limited because I only carry around my 16-35 and my 70-200, but that just means I just needed to back off a little bit. And worst case scenario, what I could do is just take a quick little pan if I wanted to capture a little bit more data. But for the most part, I think this composition works. The balance is really nice. We're not cutting off this aspen, which is going to draw attention, and we have these peaks and the trees here that kind of line up to the symmetry of our composition. Works really well. Hasn't changed in like 30 minutes, so I think the shots that I probably already taken are what is going to work, and we'll probably move on. So, enjoy. Let's get a shot in the back here. Nice.
Okay, so now that you've seen how we've taken the image in the field, let's jump into Lightroom to see what we're working with. All right, so this is the image we're going to end up using. It's the one that had the least amount of haze, so there's a little bit more clarity on the tree. And this is the image we're going to end up with once we finish our edit. Okay, so I'm just going to go through this image like I normally would and show you and talk about some of the things that I normally do. So the first thing I usually always do is start by changing the profile from Adobe Color to Adobe Landscape. What that's going to do is just add a little bit of saturation, a little bit of contrast, but also bring up some shadows and just kind of make the image more dynamic. The next thing I normally do, depending on the saturation in the image, sometimes I don't mix that profile with adding blue saturation from the calibration panel, but in this particular image, it's very dull already because of that haze, so we can get away with it. So I'm actually going to bring it all the way to 100. You're going to notice how that color pops I'm actually going to bring the hue down about -10. I've been doing this with a lot of my fall color change images. And this is giving us a really good baseline. So the next thing I'm going to do is come in here and make some contrast in the image because, again, it is so dull. Now, that might be the look that you want. You might want that hazy, very little contrast part of the image. But for my edits, I wanted to add it a little bit in. Okay, so this is giving a pretty good baseline for this image. And the first thing I'm noticing is just how distracting this foreground is. So we're going to add a linear gradient, and I'm using Lightroom version 11, which is pretty new. And you'll notice that the gradient menu is different. A lot of it is just the same. They've just reorganized some things and added the ability to add color and range masks without having to have another mask. Anyways, we're not going to get into that right now. Just know that most of this stuff is still the same. So we're going to come in here and add a linear gradient. One thing I do like about the feature is I can see where the gradients all are on a list. Makes it really easy to know which mask is which. And now that we have that, we're going to bring our exposure down pretty heavy, maybe not that much. And we're also going to bring our shadows down. And what this is going to do is so if I kept darkening this, it's just going to make the image look a little unnatural. But by bringing the shadows down, it leaves a little bit of the little pops of light here on the grass. Makes it look a little bit more natural. The last thing I'm going to do is actually bring down the saturation of that area because realistically, it's pretty dull already. And I don't want my viewer's eye going to it. And this is just a nice subtle way to keep my viewer's eye to the center of the screen. That looks pretty good. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is draw more attention to that tree. So we're going to add a color range mask. Now, there was a roundabout way to do this in the previous version of Lightroom, which is just by adding a graduated filter and then adding a color range mask on that. That's actually how I did this image before version 11 came out. So if you're not using version 11, just add a graduated filter that affects the entire image and add a color range mask to it. Okay, so I'm going to select my color. Basically, I'm looking to only affect the tree as much as possible without the ground. So I'm going to hit O to be able to see my overlay there of what I'm actually selecting. And I think this is looking pretty good. Let's maybe add another color. There we go. That looks pretty good. And let's go in here and start editing it. I'm going to hit O again to remove that overlay. The first thing I want to do is make those leaves a little bit more red. So I'm going to add some tint. Next thing I'm going to do is bring up the whites and make them a little bit brighter. Now this is going to look like they're too bright, but the next thing we're going to do is add dehaze, and that's going to darken them and really make those colors pop. I'm going to add a little bit of clarity to those colors. I'm going to bring down the highlights to add a little bit more contrast. I'm going to bring up the exposure just a little bit there as well. And let's bring the highlights down. And you can kind of get an idea of what that is doing. I'm going to delete it and undo. It's really making those leaves pop a little bit. Now the next thing I want to do, is I also want to add a radial gradient and keep making those leaves and that tree pop in our image. So I'm going to put it over the tree, and on this I don't have to invert it anymore. It's only affecting what's in the actual gradient. Once again, I'm going to bring the tint up a little bit, not as much. I'm going to bring the whites up. I have to be careful because I know it's affecting the sky in the background. Bring the highlights down. Also add a little bit of dehaze in there. It's looking pretty good. And maybe just bring the exposure up. Highlights down a little bit more. And I think that's looking really good. So let's come into our overall image and bring the highlights of the whole image down. I'm really just trying to affect the sky in the top part. And just continue to help bring my viewer's eye to that tree. I'm actually going to remove some clarity in the whole image because that helps with that foggy look. And I also added some clarity into the leaves when we were using our color mask there. And I think that's looking pretty good. Let's add some dehaze to the whole image. And that looks pretty good. Let's bring down the saturation of the entire image because once you add contrast in and dehaze and all of these other things like the tint and you're changing a bunch of those things, your your saturation can start to get a little bit too much. So you got to be careful how much you actually add in. So I'm going to remove just a little bit there. And I think this is looking pretty good. Overall, we're almost done. I think what we're going to do, the final touch, is add some sharpening. usually about 75, and then I come in here to the mask while holding Option or Alt on a PC and make sure that it's only affecting the areas I want, which is obviously not the sky. And I think for the last thing, we just need to make sure the crop looks pretty good. Not much we have to do in terms of the crop here. Our original composition did a pretty good job of balancing that tree. And I think that looks pretty good. And that's the image. From start to finish, you watched how I took it in the field. Hopefully you learned some techniques in Lightroom as well, maybe even in the field. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next week. Later.